Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. I'm the author of the 10UN Academy series, which you can get anywhere you buy books, and this is English Nerd. Today, I'm going to share with you one of my all-time favorite poems, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. It's so packed with meaning that there's no way I'm going to be able to cover everything in this video. As I've said with some of my other analytical videos, this is to help teach you, this is to broaden your appreciation for some of these works, but of course, if you're writing a paper or something, those ideas need to be your own. So at a minimum, credit this video and don't just take these ideas and pass them off as your own work, which would be plagiarism, which would make me not happy. So there is so much in this poem, as I mentioned before, that the chances that I will cover everything are very small, and it's still going to end up being a very long video. Okay, without further ado, let's take a look at The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. So, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, first thing you want to look at with a poem is the title. And so what we have is, it's a love song, allegedly. We'll see that that's, if you've read this poem, then that's kind of questionable, of J. Alfred Prufrock. We never find out what the first name of this person is. So there's that. This is the epigraph. I always get epigraph and epigram mixed up. I know I'm an English teacher and I've taught the difference a million times, but you know how you just have those hang-ups. It's the little piece before the poem begins. This is obviously in Italian, and I don't speak Italian, but I remember the gist. This is a passage from Dante's Inferno, and it essentially says that if I thought that you were able to go back to the land of the living, I would not tell you my story, but since I doubt that you'll ever return, here it is. It's said by one of the sinners in the Inferno in that story to Dante, who's traveling through the different circles of hell. I think this is an apt beginning to this poem, or a kind of footnote to the beginning, because Prufrock is telling us his innermost thoughts, but there's this understanding that we are also like Prufrock, and so we won't be able to communicate with other people in a meaningful way, and so his secrets and his shame will still remain a secret, which you'll kind of see as we go on. So it begins very famously. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. Let's just stop there for a second. Like a patient etherized upon a table. So this is a shocking analogy, and it's meant to be. It's meant to be this kind of sterile, ominous kind of way of describing the evening. It's unorthodox, it's jarring. And even though the poem starts out as a love song might, let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, there's something very, very clearly wrong. In the third line, we find out that there is just something off about what's happening here. So let's continue on. Again, there's going to be so much more that I don't cover in this video, because I could go on for 3 hours pretty easily about what's in here. So I'm going to be just carrying on. Let us go, he repeats. Through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask what is it? Let us go and make our visit. So in this first stanza, you can probably hear some rhyme. We have what is it, make our visit, hotels, oyster shells. But essentially this is a free verse poem because there's no set kind of rhyme or meter. There are moments when there's a kind of music to what's happening, but it's obviously not a sonnet, it's not blank verse. like Shakespeare would use for his plays very often. So it's almost more like a rapper might use sound and meter kind of flowing in and out of using it, but then essentially doing it just for the sound of the moment, not having something that is actually set throughout. So to go to the meaning here, so we have half-deserted streets, muttering retreats. We have restless nights in one-night cheap hotels, sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. So we have negative things here. Empty things. One night cheap sawdust restaurants. They don't even have oysters. There's something empty. There are oyster shells instead. Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. So the you seems to refer back to let us go then you and I. So the person that Prufrock is, it's the love song of Alfred Prufrock. So he's speaking to his lover, I suppose. But there's something very everymanish about having that second person pronoun there to lead you to an overwhelming question. And I think that's intentional because there is this overwhelming question that pops up, or the mention of an overwhelming question throughout this entire poem. It is never explicitly stated what this is, this overwhelming question. But there's a kind of feeling that you get throughout reading this poem that helps you understand what this overwhelming question might be. One of the issues is that there's always this diversion, this distraction from actually addressing the overwhelming question, the difficulties of modern life. So it's a tedious argument, insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. So we're not quite sure what that question is at the moment, because immediately he shifts as though he's almost afraid to ask it and says, "Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit." This makes light of that clearly important question. This almost sounds like a jingle or something. And the same thing is true of this little couplet too. In the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. So Michelangelo, however you prefer to pronounce that, is high art, is an important topic as well, and yet it's not treated with any kind of seriousness, at least if the rhyme scheme is any indication. Look at these little lines, how they just kind of sing-songy, and there's no actually diving into these more difficult kind of topics. Okay, third stanza. The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. I'll be honest, this is one of the most opaque stanzas for me in this poem. I don't know why Eliot takes this much time to describe the yellow fog. What I have noticed, of course, are a few things, although, like I said, I don't know why it's quite this long of a stanza. So we have yellow fog, yellow smoke. There's something, once again, unsettling about the idea of yellow fog. It's more like smog than actual fog. And so once again, we get this unsettling tone. And there's an extended metaphor here of the fog being a creature. It's unclear what kind of creature, but a cat kind of comes to mind. We have a muzzle, we have a tongue, we have curling once about the house, we have falling asleep. And in addition to that, or because of that, it's a yellow fog, yellow smoke, and then it acts like this sort of creature. There's a sense that there is something dangerous outside of this house where they're trying to make light of these serious things. Oh, don't talk about overwhelming questions. Oh, what do you think about Michelangelo? Oh, that's great. Outside, there's something, it's not clear if it's dangerous, but there's something off. There's something waiting. There's a creature in the darkness. So there's that. Okay, next one here. Let me do this so you can see. Oh, come on. Just fold this over, I suppose. Whoops. All right, stay. Here we go. And continuing. And indeed, it says, there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window panes. There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create, and time for all the works and hands, and days of hands, that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you, and time for me, and time yet for 100 indecisions, and for 100 visions and revisions, before a taking of a toast and tea. Okay, this is a gold mine right here. We have the idea there will be time repeated over and over again. There will be time. There will be time. There will be time. There will be time. It's almost like this kind of self-soothing mantra. There will be time to change. There will be time to do all these things. There will be time. There will be time. Not right now, but there will be time. There's also in that an allusion to Ecclesiastes. Let's see if I can spell it without looking. Ecclesiastes. I think that's how you spell it. Ecclesiastes, it's a book of the Old Testament, which is where you get that famous set of lines, there will be time to murder and create, there will be time for this, time for that, kind of like that Simon Garfunkel song, which also is a reference to Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is quite a short book of the Old Testament, and its central message is that all is vanity, all is meaningless. All the things that you think have meaning do not have meaning, and then it concludes by saying, except for serving God. So all is meaningless is kind of the refrain in Ecclesiastes, but its most famous section is there will be time for this and that, a time for this, time for that. And with somebody like T.S. Eliot, we need to take these references quite seriously because he brings in so many allusions to his work. He was tremendously well educated. Obviously, he has the Italian epigraph of Dante's Inferno earlier on, and so this is just another work that he weaves in that if you understand a little bit more about it, it can add depth to your understanding. So there will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. So here we continue to get the idea that people are not connecting in any meaningful fashion. We had the sing-songiness of the women coming and going, talking of Michelangelo. Here we have not people meeting, not souls or something like that, certainly, but a face that meet the faces. There's this surfaciness that is that doesn't allow us to get to the heart of people. There will be time to murder and create, time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question. There's the question. Time for you and time for me, and then diversion. Once again, we don't actually get the question, but I think we're starting to see that it has something to do with this unsettled feeling that's just in the bones of this poem, and we'll continue to see that I think it has to do with that lack of meaningful connection or even just meaning in general. Time yet for 100 indecisions. It's not even decisions that you have time for. I mean, I guess you do have time for some according to this, but you have time yet for 100 indecisions before, and for 100 visions and revisions before a taking of a toast and tea. Everything culminates in just this empty kind of societal gesture, you know. It's almost like, oh yes, there will be time to do all these grand things before we go to Starbucks. You know, not that there's anything wrong with that, but that can't be the mighty conclusion of all of these indecisions and these revisions. That's a letdown. Okay, on to the next page. Pardon me while I do this. Okay, in the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. It's repeated once again. There's this empty, sing-songy reference to grand things. And indeed, there will be time, there's that phrase again, or I guess it's a clause, to wonder, do I dare and do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair. It's always indecisions. It's always turning back. It's never going forward. The answer is never, yes, I do dare to do anything. Just to note. With a bald spot in the middle of my hair, they will say, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin. My necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions which a minute will reverse. Ooh, this is a juicy stanza. So it starts out very much like the one before this, and indeed there will be time to wonder, do I dare? I already mentioned the turning back and descending the stair. With a bald spot in the middle of my hair, they will say this, they will say this. He's attributing all of these judgmental comments to the people in the room. He's super self-conscious about aging in particular. He has a bald spot, he has arms and legs are thin. Later in the poem, we see that he is growing older and is terrified and distressed by the prospect. And instead of kind of addressing it himself, facing his fears, he just retreats into himself. He descends the stair. He fears other people's opinions, and despite his efforts, his morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin, my necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin, he fears that it's not going to be enough. The simplest gesture, the simplest act, because of how self-conscious he is and how disconnected he feels, is momentous. Do I dare disturb the universe? You think about people with crippling social anxiety, and I think all of us can have some level of social anxiety at different times, but you think about how difficult it can be to just make a phone call or throw your trash out while somebody is talking in a presentation. And for Prufrock, that sensation of how momentous this tiny act is becomes 100-fold larger. So, do I dare disturb the universe? You're not going to disturb the universe by actually acting, but he is afraid that anything that he does is going to create a ripple effect and make a mark that maybe he doesn't want to make in the universe. In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions which a minute will reverse. I really like this line because we have a kind of tick-tock of the clock. It does have almost like a rapper's cadence to it, with time just rushing by. It's fabulous. For I have known them all, already known them all. Really, there's nothing left to discover? I doubt that very much, especially since you're not doing anything or acting at all. I have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. I know the voices dying with a dying fall beneath the music from a farther room. So how should I presume? Here we have another allusion, and I'm sure there are many in here that I don't necessarily see. But this one is from the beginning of Twelfth Night. Duke Orsino says that he wants Viola, the main character, to continue playing the song that she's playing because, especially the part with the dying fall, because if he gets his complete fill of this romantic music, maybe his romantic feelings will he says, surfeit and then die. He wants to be so overwhelmed with all of this music and romance that he grows sick of it because he's not having any luck in love, and this might be a way to kill that. So not only is it just a cool line, but there's also that association with it. Make of that what you will. The line before it, I have measured out my life with coffee spoons, is one that I've seen as kind of a popular one for tattoos and things like that. In context, it's really pretty despairing. It refers back to ideas such as before the taking of a toast and tea, which we saw on the last page, where there seems to be all of this movement, all of this meaning, but then the marking of time is nothing more than just one coffee to the next, to the next, to the next, and nothing more than that. So more I could say here, but I'm moving on anyway. And I have known the eyes already, known them all, the eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. And when I am formulated, sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways? And how should I presume? So we have a sort of refrain starting here with the same line in the or a very similar line as the previous stanza. Couple things I want to point out here. First of all, I have known the eyes already. We have parts of people. We never have the full person. We had faces before, the face to meet the faces that you meet. Here we have the eyes, later we're going to have the arms, but it's never the whole person. Eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. Again, we have these kind of socially acceptable norms. Acceptable norms. How are you? I'm fine. But there's nothing beyond that. It's just, how are you? I'm fine. You have your next coffee, you go on to your next thing, but there's nothing real underlying it at all. So he feels stifled by all of this. He says, when I'm formulated, sprawling on a pin, pinned and wriggling on the wall. Once again, he feels trapped, he feels judged, just messed up when he's around other people. He doesn't know how to talk about why he does what he does or who he really is. This idea of sprawling on a pin is reminiscent of being like a bug pinned to a board, which could be, and probably is, knowing Eliot and how he likes to weave these things in, another allusion, this time to Kafka's Metamorphosis, where the guy turns into a beetle. So you can look at that if you're interested. I'm not 100% sure, since it's not an identical wording or anything like that, but it definitely reminds me of that idea. And I've known the arms already. There they are. As I mentioned before, I've known the arms already. Still, we have parts of people. Back to this. Known them all. Arms that are braceleted and white and bare, but in the lamplight downed with light brown hair. Is it perfume from a dress that makes me so digress? Arms that lie along a table or wrap about a shawl. And how should I then presume? And how should I begin? Again, we have that refrain for the third time. And we have the arms, just like we had the eyes up there. Arms are repeated quite a few times here. Enough times, arms that lie along a table or wrap about a shawl, that it almost sounds a little creepy, like a corpse or something like that. Arms that lie along a table. So there's something at first, ooh, how alluring, braceleted, white and bare. There's something kind of sensual in that description. But then it's followed up right away with this kind of interior thought, but in the lamplight downed with the light brown hair, which is not normally something that is seen as desirable or sexy. So maybe it's when you get close to something, even a part of someone, then there's something that's going to disappoint you about it, or not be what you want. At least that's my interpretation. Here we have another couplet that is just sing-songy and distracts from the real question at hand. Okay, we have kind of a break here. Maybe I'll get through all of this, who knows. We have a break here, and then we have this unusual set of lines between this break and that break. You can see the little dots there. Shall I say, I have gone at dusk through narrow streets and watched the smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows. I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. Okay, well that was weird. So he's trying out something to say. I've gone at dusk through narrow streets. I've watched smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows. Is this experience of mine going to express how I'm lonely, or is going to express part of who I am. I don't know. There's an ellipsis there. And the part that always stood out more to me in this section is this here. It's not a couplet, so maybe I shouldn't have marked it in the same way, but oh well. He says, I should have been a pair of ragged claws. So we have a crab kind of image here scuttling across the floors of silent seas. So that would be subhuman, that would be alone, quiet. And even here we have only a part of a crab. We don't have the whole thing. I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. This would have been more comfortable for me than to have to interact with these people. And that's a sad comment on how difficult he finds it to find any meaningful connection. It would be easier to not even have to try. This reminds me a lot, although I'm sure that this is not an allusion to this, of Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. At the end of that Dr. Faustus play, and when Faustus is about to be dragged to hell because of his deal with the devil, he has this final soliloquy, and it basically says, oh, I wish I were an animal. I wish I were just a little drop of water in the ocean. I wish I were, and it keeps kind of going down and down on the medievals would say the great chain of being, you know, from an animal to a plant to something that has no growth at all, because then he wouldn't have to suffer the consequences of his negative choices. So similar kind of idea here, although not quite the same, of course. And the afternoon, the evening sleeps so peacefully. One thing I actually didn't notice until just going through it this time, and that's one of the great things about this poem. You find so much that every time I read it, literally, and I've read it many times with many different groups of students, I find something new, or they find something new and teach it to me. It's shocking. So the afternoon, the evening, that refers back to, I've known them all already, the afternoon, the evenings, mornings, afternoons. But the first description that we got of an evening was a patient etherized upon a table. And so when it says that the evening sleeps so peacefully, there could be the understanding that the evening is etherized, that it's in this kind of coma, and wouldn't that be nice? Which would refer more clearly to this past couple of lines. So anyway, make of that what you will, but that's kind of cool. Smoothed by long fingers, asleep, tired, or it malingers, stretched on the floor, here beside you and me. Oh, right, there's that other person, let's not forget. Should I, after tea and cakes and ices, have the strength to force the moment to its crisis? But though I have wept and fasted, wept and prayed, though I have seen my head, grown slightly bald, brought in upon a platter, I am no prophet, and here's no great matter. I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I have seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker, and in short, I was afraid. Okay, so we have another allusion here. This is to John the Baptist. John the Baptist, who was beheaded and presented to the king on a platter. But he says, I am no prophet, I am no John the Baptist. I'm just kind of going through this difficulty, and it all doesn't have that meaning that being a prophet would have given it. And again, we have the reference to just all those social little interactions, tea and cake and ices, things that don't matter very much, but the things that have overtaken his life, essentially. I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker. I have seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker, and in short, I was afraid. Here he's talking about death, fear of death. And it's not only fear of death, but it's fear of not having a life that meant anything. The eternal footman here is snickering at the greatness, the best that he has to offer. And so he's afraid that there is something inherently mockable about his very existence. And that makes him afraid, I think, not only of death, but also of life too, because if this is the best he has, then how terrifying is that? On that joyful note, let's go on to the next stanza. And would it have been worth it after all? If you notice, this is another thing that I just noticed this time going through it. And a lot of these stanzas begin with conjunctions, and it feels rambly at times, but that makes sense. He's trying to express what it is that he's thinking about, and this gives it a sort of, not quite stream of consciousness, but at times stream of consciousness feel. And would it have been worth it after all? After the cups, the marmalade, the tea, among the porcelain, among some talk of you and me, would it have been worthwhile to have bitten off the matter with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a ball, to roll it towards some overwhelming question, to say, I am Lazarus, come from the dead, come back to tell you all, I shall tell you all. If one, settling a pillow by her head, should say, that is not what I meant at all, that is not it at all. Ooh, such good stuff. Okay, 2 allusions, so let's start out with those. 2 allusions that I can catch anyway. This idea of squeezing the universe into one ball comes from To His Coy Mistress by Andrew Marvell. Eliot was a big fan of Andrew Marvell. He kind of brought Marvell back to academic prominence when he was in the background for a very long time. To His Coy Mistress is a seduction poem, and the idea is that if there were time, then gladly the narrator would just admire her for hundreds and hundreds of years before they took any action on their relationship. But they don't have that kind of time, so while we are young and alive, let's squeeze the universe into a ball and roll it through, the gates of action, essentially, and, carpe that diem in, of course, a sexual sense. But that's the reference there. The wording isn't exact, but it's definitely close enough to be a clear reference to this. And then we have another allusion to Lazarus, which is a story that's found in the New Testament when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead before Jesus' own resurrection. It's one of the most famous miracle stories. And so he once again references that question, and he tries out a few different things he could say. What if I said this? What if I took this course of action or that course of action? I am Lazarus, come from the dead, come back to tell you all. I shall tell you all. But notice there's just an M dash there. There isn't actually any sort of conclusion to what he would say if he were Lazarus, come back from the dead. There's nothing, he doesn't know what's on the other side of death, which is very Hamlet-like, and that makes him presumably afraid, but he wants to have something meaningful to say. But immediately his thought goes to, if one settling a pillow by her head should say, that is not what I meant at all, that's not it at all. So there's no meaningful communication. If you've been watching my videos, you might not know how bad my handwriting is, but welcome. It is pretty bad, and I'm realizing as I make this video that my nail polish is all janky and I need to redo it. But anyway, that's not the important thing here. The important thing is that Prufrock and whoever this is, it's not even clear if it's you. It could just be somebody else. That person is not understanding Prufrock, is not actually connecting with him on any real level. That's not what I meant at all. That's not it at all. There's no way to actually bridge the gap to another person. Instead, you're isolated, alienated. You feel judged by everyone else. You're unsure if there's meaning in life. I mean, that's dark, but that's relatable to so many people in this culture. you know? So anyway, carrying on to the next stanza. And would it have been worthwhile after all? Would it have been worthwhile after the sunsets and the dooryards and the sprinkled streets, after the novels, after the teacups, after the skirts that trail along the floor? Again, not a whole person. And this and so much more. It is impossible to say just what I mean. This is at the crux, I think, of that overwhelming question at the beginning. I mean, Prufrock at this point is fed up with how he's unable to communicate the reality of his existence to another person, and how he feels that the novels and the teacups and the parties and all of this are not enough to actually fill his life with meaning. But as if a magic lantern threw the nerves in patterns on a screen, would it have been worthwhile if one, settling a pillow or throwing off a shawl and turning toward the window, should say, "That is not it at all. That is not what I meant at all." The way that Eliot says this is a little bit unusual, but this is one of those, I'm pretty sure it's an allusion, things that I'm going to share with you. This is, I think, a reference to Plato's allegory of the cave, which is the most famous part of his Republic. You can find it just by itself if you're interested, everywhere on the internet, pretty much. The idea of the allegory of the cave is that there's a person who is in a cave along with all the other people, and he's sitting up against a wall. So I'm going to try to draw a diagram here, but it's going to be really bad. So we have all these people sitting against this wall in a cave. There's fire behind the wall where they're sitting, and there are kind of shadow puppets, you know, going by that are reflecting on the wall across from them. So since they can't turn their heads, all they can see are these shadows, and they don't realize that it's not the reality of existence, that there's actually something that those shadows are referring to, which are back here behind them. And so one guy breaks free and goes up to the surface where he sees the sun and realizes that there's actually a whole world that he was unaware of, that there was more reality than he could have ever dreamed of before. And so he returns to the cave and tries to tell others about this, but he can't really see because he's been in the light, so it seems really dark now. And people just make fun of him, and he's kind of alienated and has to decide what to do. So here we have a magic lantern through the nerves in patterns on a screen. It's as though he's looking at these shadows, and he is one of these shadow people who's staring at the shadow across the wall. You may think, but that's so far-fetched, Stevens. I don't think so. For somebody who was educated in the way that Eliot was educated, this would have been kind of shorthand for this story for a lot of the people who are reading this poem. Okay, there's more I could say, but I'm just going to carry on, and I'm going to do this all in one video, and it's going to be a long one, but it'll be good. It'll be good. Don't fear. All right, Hamlet time. Yes. For those of you who have been following me for a while, you know that Hamlet is my favorite Shakespeare play, and I have that whole series that just talks about Hamlet. So here we go. No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. Am an attendant lord, one that will do to swell a progress, start a scene or two, advise the prince, no doubt an easy tool. Deferential, glad to be of use, politic, cautious, and meticulous, full of high sentence, but a bit obtuse. Almost, at times, indeed almost ridiculous, almost, at times, the fool. Okay, so Eliot knew Shakespeare. He knew Shakespeare really well, so I'm going to give you a little bit of insight into what some of this means beneath the surface. So I'm not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. Hamlet is famous for indecision. So he doesn't even rise to the level of that kind of indecision. He says, am an attendant lord. He doesn't even have the pronoun there. He has so little identity that is identifiable that he is J. Alfred Prufrock, am an attendant lord. So an attendant lord, that could be just one of the background players in Hamlet, or as he continues to kind of describe the character he might play, this sounds a lot like Polonius. Polonius is the advisor to the king in Shakespeare's Hamlet. He's known for being kind of a buffoon, just a windbag who doesn't quite know what's going on most of the time. He has some pieces of a good advice, but he does fall into a lot of these categories. And he gets rather meaninglessly killed a little over halfway through the play. So just keep all those things in mind. I grow old, which we knew from before with the hair and the legs. I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. Again, it's sing-songy, and the conclusion is so inconsequential. Compared to, this is a big idea. I grow old. What do you do with growing old? That's a question. And yet what he immediately goes to is something, once again, that doesn't really matter. I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. Well, so what? That's not an answer. It's like just going for your visit instead of thinking about that overwhelming question. This is not the end of the stanza. Let me go to the end of the stanza. He continues in the same vein. Shall I part my hair behind? Who cares? Do I dare to eat a peach? This is the lowest that I think Prufrock gets throughout this entire poem. Do I dare to eat a peach? Man, that's nothing. That's not a decision. And yet he's paralyzed to the extent that he doesn't even know that he can do that. I shall wear white flannel trousers and walk upon the beach. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. I do not think that they will sing to me. Whew, those are sad lines. Let's talk about why. So here he is. He's thinking at least about walking upon the beach. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. So there's some kind of communication, connection. And it's connected to what is mythical and supernatural. Potentially supernatural. Right? Supernatural. I'm trying to talk and write at the same time. Okay, so keep those things in mind. Mythical, supernatural beings, communication and connection. They're in the water, like the crab was in the previous, in one of those earlier stanzas, in sort of the quiet where there's not that pressure to communicate, and yet these beings are. They're calling out, they're singing even, each to each. I do not think that they will sing to me. So he's fundamentally isolated and alienated from other people. We saw lots of evidence of that previously. And higher meaning, higher existence, higher meaning, supernatural. This is his problem. This seems to be where that question rises from. I do not think that they will sing to me. This is pretty despairing. But since there still is that question rattling around inside him, I would like to think that he could at least at one time dare to actually address it and make some headway with it. But yeah, so let's finish up this poem. I have seen them, the mermaids, riding seaward on the waves. Ooh, another thing that I had noticed for the first time here that I hadn't noticed before. That would be away from him, because he's on the beach. Combing the white hair of the waves, blown back when the wind blows the water white and black. We have lingered in the chambers of the sea, by sea girls wreathed with seaweed red and brown, till human voices wake us and we drown. It's this that I think is drowning him. The human voices wake us and we drown. I mean, if he's not going to drown in this kind of beautiful alien landscape of the sea, but he is going to drown when human voices wake us from this beautiful dream, then it's this isolation and this alienation that are going to, slowly suffocate him, as we've seen throughout the rest of the poem. Now, thanks for sticking with me through this whole poem. I think that it is absolutely a work of genius, and I think that it's the clearest expression, as I believe I mentioned, of the modern dilemma of isolation and alienation. Now, keep in mind that this is not a sort of final word poem. This is a snapshot of time. 1917, I think, is when this was written. It's eminently relevant to us, but it's also presenting a problem that I think has potential solutions, questions that have potential answers if we look elsewhere, if we reach out to other sources. So that was Eliot's Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. It's the, in my opinion, quintessential modern poem that is just a complete work of genius. It's one of those works that the more you dig, the more you find. And so I hope this has inspired you to continue to find more in this poem, and at a minimum has opened your eyes to just how awesome it is. All right, well, don't forget to like this video if you like it, subscribe for more English nerdy goodness, and I will see you on Monday. Bye.